like to call the meeting to order on a work session, March 22nd, 2021. We are all here. We only have one item this evening on the agenda, and I'd like to remind council that staff will be pausing intermittently to answer any question. This item is a discussion on community development block grant eligible priorities. Please introduce yourself. We're doing it that way from now on, so let staff know. Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Jenna Goad, the Assistant to the City Manager, and I'm joined here tonight by our Grants and Neighborhood Services Supervisor, Christina Panatescu, as well as Consultant Martina Keel. As you know, in May 2020, the Council provided direction for staff to pursue Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, entitlement status, meaning that the city would receive a direct allocation of CDBG funds rather than competing for funds through the Maricopa Urban County. In late 2020, we hired a consultant, Ms. Keel, to assist us in preparing the planning documents that are required by HUD. And through a public process and data analysis, we've developed drafts of those documents for Council's review and consideration tonight before they're published for an official 30-day public comment period. This evening, we'll provide an overview of the 5-year consolidated plan and annual action plans, both of which are required by HUD, and also seek council direction on the recommended 5-year priority areas and first-year funding recommendations. And with that, I'll now turn it over to Ms. Keel to discuss the process for developing the 5-year consolidated plan.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Nice to meet you in person instead of by Zoom. I wanted to share with you, we had conversations, many conversations over the past several months with community members and stakeholders. And I wanted to share with you the overview of the 5-year consolidated plan, which is the framework for the use of community development block grant funding for the next 5 years. We update it every 5 years, obviously, unless there's an amendment. So if you make a substantial change to a priority or you change a selected activity mid-year, you have to go back and go through an amendment process and public hearings and a public comment period and all of that. So we want to make sure as we're going through this that we're keeping things as broad as we possibly can while narrowing things down to what's really important to the city of Goodyear. So I'd like to share, there are 7 elements in the consolidated plan, and if you've had an opportunity to look through that rather lengthy document, I appreciate it. But those 7 elements are affordable housing, and looks at housing quality, variety, and affordability. It looks at homelessness and other special populations being seniors, people with disabilities, people with serious mental illnesses, drug abuse and addiction issues. So it's a rather lengthy list that HUD has compiled. It looks at non-housing community development, which is things like public and human services, infrastructure, and community facilities. It talks about barriers to affordable housing development. So those are things that might make it difficult for a private sector developer to develop affordable housing in Goodyear. It develops a strategy for addressing lead-based paint, which is not a significant issue in Goodyear because your housing stock is, for the most part, pretty new. It develops an anti-poverty strategy that looks at how the city can contribute to reducing poverty among Goodyear households, and that sets a goal of reducing it by 10% over the next 5 years. Not something that you can really control. However, a goal is required, so we have a goal. And then finally, it looks at institutional structure and coordination. And that's how do you work with nonprofit organizations? How do you work together, the various city departments, to implement activities that use CDBG resources? And quite clearly, as stated in the plan, this is an emerging institutional delivery system. It's your first year. You know, if you had a lot of capacity doing it, you wouldn't need me here today. And so, you know, you always want to kind of take things rather slow when it comes to federal funding. And I think this, Christina will talk to this next year, focusing some on building that internal capacity. So the process that we went through, a very significant, lengthy outreach process. We did a resident survey that received 316 responses. We did 23 stakeholder interviews that included elected officials, nonprofit organizations, private sector representatives, and representatives from neighborhood associations. We did a community and faith roundtable meeting that was attended by 36 individuals. We talked with 23 emerging leaders with the lead alumni at that meeting. And then we did a public hearing that was attended by 11 Goodyear residents. And we did, of course, everything by Zoom. So the majority of the plan, though, is focused on data as you look through it, and it has that housing, homelessness, non-housing community development, and poverty data. And one of the things that I want to point out, because this was raised, I saw it somewhere, I don't know if it was in a community conversation that was taking place online. When we're talking about data and we're talking about housing and we're talking about planning for housing, there is no quota required when you accept community development block grant funds. It is always an option to work on housing issues, but it is not a requirement that you do so. So based on all of the data analysis and all of the feedback that we received, we then set forth the plan, and that's the plan that identifies the priorities for the next 5 years, and it's within those priority categories that you will be able to expend your CDBG funds. So HUD allows 2 priority levels. No such thing as medium. It's either a high priority or a low priority. So we say a high priority activity, and they do say you go ahead and define it, City of Goodyear. So a high priority activity is an activity that is likely to be funded with CDBG resources in the next 5 years. And a low priority activity is an activity that may be funded in the next 5 years as opportunities arise. And again, we want to keep it quite broad so that should a great opportunity come your way, you're able to invest CDBG funds in that opportunity. So high priority activities. The other thing is that we are also required to attach a numeric goal to it. So keep in mind these are just goals. They are not requirements. Okay, it's a target. If you don't meet it, you're going to be okay. So high priority activities, community facilities and improvements. That's things like infrastructure and facilities to benefit 2,000 low and moderate income residents. Public services, human services, likewise to benefit 2,000 low and moderate income residents and vulnerable residents. And then, of course, program administration, high priority activity. In terms of lower priority activities, those activities that you might fund if opportunities were to arise would be attainable and sustainable housing. We have talked about rehabilitating owner-occupied housing, performing emergency repairs for homeowners. The goal there is to 10 units, which I know does not sound like a high number, but it can get quite expensive. To provide attainable housing, so this is like helping to build infrastructure in support of maybe a new small development that is going to be affordable, and to provide assistance to 5 first-time home buyers. And then the final low priority activity would be economic development, and the goal there would be to benefit 2 businesses. So I want to pause here and get your feedback in terms of, did we capture, this is basically all of the broad categories that you might use CDBG funds for. And I'd like your feedback as to whether we adequately captured what should be categorized as high priority, low priority, and if you have any questions or other comments.
Reach out to council. Councilman Bazilla.
With the definition that you have for the high priority, to benefit, what's that, LMI residents and vulnerable population, could they be kind of swamped? Because it seems to me the low priority to rehabilitate owner-occupied housing kind of would also fall in there as well, unless I'm over reading what that definition is up above. Does that make sense? You're talking about providing residents that are vulnerable. You'd also be providing residents that are vulnerable if you help them do something with their housing.
Mm-hmm. It's the way that CDBG kind of separately categorizes activities. So, like, yeah. So yes, housing it could benefit that vulnerable population, but we have to say it a different way in order for the HUD to understand. So it's like, it's a new language. So a public service would be something more in lines of helping somebody with food, shelter, clothing, kind of the basic day-to-day necessities.
Okay, to me, housing's basic, but that's okay. Maybe they just speak a foreign language.
So you're thinking that the housing should perhaps be a higher priority activity?
To me, you could almost interchange them because depending on how bad the housing is and how bad the need is, to me, that would meet the vulnerable population piece. That's just my own opinion.
Thank you. That's an excellent point.
I have something to add. Go ahead.
So we used to have a program that was weatherization of a home.
Molly, be sure you get in the microphone. Thank you.
When I served on CBDG, we had a weatherization program where we went out and gave money to homeowners who needed to have new windows or an air conditioner fixed or something like that to keep them in their homes. And I had mentioned that to Christina, and it's a wonderful program, but it takes a lot of staff time to figure out what contractors we can use, who's reputable, who needs what, and then verify all of that. So it's something that we could look into down the road, but as our very first project, it may be a little bit too much for us to take on all at once because we want to do something that we're successful at. Whatever it is, we just want to be able to say, yes, that worked, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? It is a wonderful program, and the seniors especially are the ones in the low-income families that really do not have the money to upgrade their home or weatherize it or do a lot of things to it, and that would be a real wonderful service to them once we can get it established. But it'll take us a couple of years to do that, I think.
So I'm going to ask at this point, Council, because I'm just dying to ask. So is there a program that keeps them in their house? If you go to the front of the newspaper, Arizona Republic this morning, they talk about this and that how they're not successful taking people off the street and putting them in the homes because it takes so much preparation before you even do that. So it just surmised in there, maybe the best way to do it is if we can prevent that happening through a program like this and not put them in that strange element. Sorry, guys, I just couldn't want to get that out. Bill, did you have something to say?
I was reading and listening, which is always dangerous for me. So the public services piece, is that the sidewalks and storm drains and that kind of thing? So tell me what this is.
That falls under community facilities and improvements. So public services is going to be things like shelter, services for people experiencing homelessness prevention, utility assistance, food and clothing assistance, healthcare, mental health services, just kind of when you think about it, the full gamut of human services, pretty much everything can be done with CDBG within limits.
Programs,
Yeah.
Okay, so that is that the community services and programs? I'm looking at a document that I think went out a couple of months ago. That looks familiar. Is that this community services piece that we're talking about under public services? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, so, yeah, the public services would be the community services, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Then I don't have any questions.
Brandon?
Yeah, so I think I like the community facilities being one of the first ones because we're already doing that right now. That's what most traditionally, at least when I was on CDAC, or I guess I am still on CDAC, that's the project that Goodyear usually does, is the water lines and updating the infrastructure. So I know we can do that. And then the other things here, I mean, I'm good with, but I was curious. I'm sure we'll be partnering with lots of nonprofits for all of these. So, because we don't have these public services necessarily. So we'll be partnering with nonprofits and all the different groups in the area. The same thing with the housing. I know there's a nonprofit that they do just this. They help owners with emergency repairs and try to rehab and things like that as well. It's not to the scope that Tollison does, where they're doing a lot more to one house, but more of the quick hit, kind of helping people stay in their homes. So I guess it's a statement and a question, but so I assume the first question is we're using nonprofit partners. We're not creating new health service organizations. And then the second thing is, yeah, I'm okay with community facilities being in there. I mean, I think I like them all as priorities, but especially the economic development. But yeah, I think this is a good start, and we can always change these up as we're going throughout the years as well.
Yeah, when you actually, there wouldn't be a lot of benefit to changing something from a low priority to a high priority activity. But when that 5-year window rolls around, you could change, there could be changes then. But because the priority categories are very broad, there's not going to be a benefit to making a significant change.
If for some reason in the future we do everything possible we possibly could with the money for infrastructure, I mean, then yeah, we're looking for something else to do. Then I'm sure we could move down the line or look at other options as well. So, or a combination throughout the years. So, okay, thank you.
Laura?
Well, I had the understanding, as Wally explained it, in that to start out, we were going to work on infrastructure, more tangible things as we get some experience under our belt, and then work on some of these other things. And then we've been talking about public services and trying to get at some thought of what that might be. So we have CBDG funds, but we also have CARES that'll be in the mix somewhere for some of those additional, like homeless prevention and things like that. So it seems like we have a couple of buckets, but this is so highly regulated. We just need to have a pathway and a structure and just get started. Let's just do this.
Sherry?
I think I pretty much agree with everybody else that they're good priorities. I am obviously concerned right now about the homelessness and some of those issues. I know there is the CARES funding, so I think that's a good thing. So how flexible if these are our priorities and we get money and all of a sudden, because things are changing, like all of a sudden here's $20 million, and then, things are changing. So is it flexible to us to move between those priorities if a need pops up in one of those other areas?
Yes, you can. It's not, if you do it mid-year, you do have to go through a formal amendment process. But say you do something this year and then next year you have a lot of latitude again, and so you can, this is an annual process that you're going to be having this discussion. And
So if we start with like the infrastructure area, and then next year as we see things, maybe they don't go as good as hopefully they will go, then we can make an amendment or we can change it next year as it comes along.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And you can change it in the middle of the year. You just have to go through this drawn out process. Yeah, it's very bureaucratic. Yes.
Gotcha.
Any other comments? All right, no other comments? It was a good briefing. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I think I hear consensus for support for the priorities. To reiterate what Martina explained, that's like the big outline, and it lasts for 5 years. Anything that's on that list in the next 5 years, we could do. So we wanted to leave it as broad as possible. The thing is, each year, we'll do an annual action plan, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now. And that annual action plan is telling HUD how we intend to spend the dollars that they're going to give us. And what is required is that it fall into one of those categories we just talked about. It doesn't even have to be a high priority category. It can be a low priority category. It just has to be one of those categories, and it has to benefit low mod income individuals and or areas, which I don't remember if we shared for the city of Goodyear an example of a low mod income Goodyear household or neighborhood is where a family of 4 has a household income of $62,250 a year. And there are 5,800 Goodyear households who would fall into that category.
5,800?
Yes.
Okay, 5,800.
So moving on to this annual action plan, well, I think I explained all of this. It has to tell them specifically what we're going to spend the money in and be tied to what we discussed just now in the 5-year plan. Next slide, please. Thank you. There are some constraints that are really important to keep in mind. As you all know, federal dollars bring with them a lot of additional requirements. So it's important to please give consideration to the city's capacity and experience in administering federal funds like these. Until now, the county has done the heavy lifting for us as a part of the urban county. And so there will be a learning curve. It's certainly something we can do, but there will be a learning curve as we build up those program administration capabilities. Also, please keep in mind that as soon as one CDBG dollar touches a project, all of those HUD regulations go with the entire project. So it can be inefficient, although you might be tempted to spread money across various projects. It can be very inefficient to do that because also it can increase overall project costs and the timeline can get extended for things. Also, please note that there are spending limits. We are only allowed to spend up to 15% of our total allocation from HUD on public services. So those are those direct services like the emergency assistance. And we are only allowed to spend up to 20% of our total allocation on program administration, which would be like the environmental assessments that take place or the Davis-Bacon interviews. Let's see. Also, we do have an expenditure requirement. So it could be tempting because especially now with our population being what it is, our allocation is $422,807. It can be tempting to save that to let it add up over time and then blow your wad all at once. But the thing is, you have expenditure requirements, so we really need to be tracking that we're spending about 85% of our annual allocation to ensure that we don't get passed over 1 year because we haven't kept up with our spending.
That's good.
Next slide. Oh, thank you. So with all of that in mind, we have been notified by HUD that we will be getting $422,807 in fiscal year 22 for us. And now we need to tell HUD how we will spend that $422,000. Since it's capped, I'll start with the program administration recommendation. I did reach out to all of our neighboring cities who are CDBG entitlement to see what they do with their program administration, and they all take the full 20% for program administration. So we recommend that Goodyear do the same. Examples of administrative expenses include activities related to compliance with the federal regulations, promoting the principles of fair housing, assessing neighborhood conditions and the need for human and public services to address the need of vulnerable populations, and establishing application and monitoring systems. So definitely stuff we'll be working on. The maximum we could apply to administration costs is $84,561. So that would leave us a balance of $338,246. Particularly since this is our first year, we do recommend focusing on community improvements rather than public services, attainable and sustainable housing, or economic development initiatives. So there were 3 eligible community improvement projects that emerged after we looked at our fiscal year 21 to 25 CIP. All 3 of these projects would benefit a low mod income area, and they were planned for completion in fiscal year 22. The projects could wind up being funded with other funding sources during the development of the fiscal year 22 budget. And so they're conceptual, of course, until the budget is passed. These estimates that you see up here do take into consideration any additional cost burden that might come about as a result of the CDBG-related federal requirements like Davis-Bacon. So for your consideration, the Willis Road streetscape improvements. This would be new granite, trees, and shrubs. They are planned for the section of Willis Road between Estrella Parkway and Mountain Vista Drive. The full estimated cost of this project could be funded with our CDBG allocation, and there would be a balance remaining. You are familiar with the North Subdivision's streetlight project. It is wrapping up the design stage right now, and we're going to be starting construction in July. The construction costs are estimated at over $900,000, and we already have $303,200 from the county's CDBG program invested in that construction part of the project, which reduces the overall construction costs that remain to be funded to $681,245. So if we applied what remained of our CDBG allocation, the $338,246, to this project as well as the county's investment, the burden on our general fund would be reduced to less than $345,000. Something to keep in mind in this project is what I mentioned about once one CDBG dollar touches the project, so it's already got CDBG all over it. And finally, for your consideration, there is another streetscape improvement project from the CIP planned for Estrella Parkway from the I-10 to MC-85. If you were choosing between streetscape projects, staff would recommend the Willis Road project over the Estrella Parkway project, since CDBG would not cover the full $814,000 project costs, and given the overall increased costs to accommodate federal regulations, we don't feel it offers the greater return on investment. We've bolded here what our recommendation would be. We strongly encourage you to consider the North Subdivision's streetlight project. We can leverage our experience and the technical support of the county that's already done the environmental and can be coaching us through the expenditure of funds. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you for discussion and direction on how the city should program its fiscal year 22 CDBG allocation, and specifically whether you agree with our 20% program administration and 80% community improvement split, and if so, which of these projects you'd like to see funded with those fiscal year 22 funds. And the 3 of us are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Good, we appreciate that discussion. All right, Laura?
I can understand how the North Subdivision streetlights provides a direct benefit to LMI residents, but can you tell me how the streetscape improvements meet that need?
Sure. We've got a map of where the low mod income residents reside, and those areas do fall into that mapped area.
I'd be in support in completing the entire North Subdivision project.
Sherry?
I would agree with Councilmember Kano. I think that's a good project to start. I think there's very visible and obviously it's a good project to really show that we can do what we can do, and you can actually see it and you can see the results. So I think that's a great one. And like you said, once $1 touches, maybe we start keeping it all together, and then after that one's done, go to another project. You said when $1 touches, then they all become CBG. How does that work with the services? Like if we're working with nonprofits, does that mean all the work forever we do with the nonprofits, or just for that cycle?
Well, just for that cycle and for how those dollars are spent. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but they will, so that would be subcontracting, right? Because we don't provide the service ourselves. And so we would have to pass along to whoever we subcontract reporting requirements, and they'll have to keep track of that data for the people they serve. But then also there are certain populations that HUD just presumes as being low mod income. And so examples of that would be senior population or people with physical disabilities. And so you don't have to get income eligibility for them. You just know if you're doing a Silver Sneakers program, you're getting the low mod
Meals on
income.
Wheels.
Exactly.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, but I agree 100%. I like the 20%. I think that's a great project to start with, that one you pointed out.
And just to clarify that, because human services, public services are a non-construction activity, it's really, the requirements are just attached to that dollar and that ultimate beneficiary. So it's not quite as complicated from the regulatory standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Wally?
Well, I have a couple of questions. Could our annual survey that we do for housing or for human services that folks might want, could we pay for that out of the 20% program admin fee?
The annual survey,
Mm-hmm.
do you mean like where we did the community assessment or
Well,
this?
when we're going out to the community to find out what human services programs they need or want, and because we don't have that.
Yes. I want Martina to check my math here.
Okay.
Or my logic, but my understanding is we could.
Good.
The thing to keep in mind is this is true for all of our CDBG spending. CDBG doesn't want us just throwing money at things.
No.
So if we're going to do that, the expectation is we're going to do something with the information
yeah,
we
right.
find.
Yeah, but I just wanted to know yeah.
Yes.
And then my
tangible.
second question is, if we don't spend all of our allocation, and you said we had to spend at least 80%, do we keep the 20% and it goes on for the next year? Because
Yeah. They
Well,
don't take it away. It
because
will roll.
in CBDG, if we did not spend the money, we had to return it, and then it was dillied out to all of us that didn't get a grant.
Right.
So I'm glad to know we could keep our money, so we have to be sure and spend 80% of it.
85%.
Oh, 85%, okay. And my very last question is, you said for the Estrella Parkway and Mount Vista? Where's Mount Vista? Did you say Mountain Vista? Where's Mountain Vista? I mean, I drive Estrella Parkway every day.
Isn't it?
Halfway between the fire station and
Yeah.
Strip Parkway, I think.
What fire station?
The new one?
Oh, way out there. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, never mind then, that's fine. I was thinking it was up north, so it's not,
Oh,
okay.
maybe by Cantamia? That would make sense.
By Cantamia,
That
certainly,
would
thank
make
you.
sense.
Got it. So I agree with the 80-20, and I think we do need to do North Subdivision because they do not have street lights like
Sorry,
all
I
of us
got
do.
distracted.
So
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
I said, I agree with the 80-20, and I agree that we need to do North Subdivision because they do not have the lighting that the rest of our city does. And this is a public safety issue for them. So, thank you.
Any other, Bill?
I'm in support of the 20% going, obviously, for administration. I think that that only makes sense. As far as these 3 projects, I absolutely agree with Councilmember Kano that we need to finish the North Subdivision, even if that takes obviously multiple years, in addition to anything else that we've started from previous years. So if we've got 3/4 of the sidewalks done in historic, let's finish that before we start something new. I mean, let's get all that stuff done and then let's move on. If we're talking about those community improvements and not those human services that may develop over the next year, which we're kind of all holding our breath and hoping that they don't come, but perhaps they will, and we need to be prepared for that. But I think I would much rather see us go in that direction than create 2 new projects. And thank you for all the work. This has been great.
Did you say talk, Brandon?
I'm just saying the same thing. So thank you very much. I do agree with the 20%, and I like the North Subdivision, and just make sure we get, light screens as we're installing them as well. So.
Joe?
No, I agree with Councilmember Kano. I agree with the 20% and North Subdivision streetlights.
Has everybody spoken? All right, I'm going to tell you, I agree with the North Subdivision. If you think back, I think when I got on the council in 2005, and the things we wanted to do, and I think I like the idea that we're going to try to finish an area, or what we think at this point would finish the area. And I think that it would be nice there because I think they greatly appreciate it. It's a neighborhood that's been there for a long time. Some of those people, actually their family are living there from generations. So I think that would be, in it, it's like it's historical Goodyear, okay? And we need to keep improving that. So thank you. Thank you for the information. I'm not as familiar with it. I know Wally is, and I think Laura is, and it's interesting to hear. And then it just makes you think, you want to be sure you spend your money where there's progress. If we can't do that, and some of the things that I see up there, or the things you talked about, would be very difficult and could reverse themselves on the value of it. So thanks for the research. Appreciate it. Any other? I always interrupt. Are you completed, or do you have a continuation? Anything else?
Yeah, just very quickly, Mayor and Council, thank you very much for that thoughtful discussion and the direction that you provided. The next steps will be that we will publish these draft plans for a 30-day public comment period beginning on April 1st. And the public and other stakeholders are encouraged to review the plans on the city's website and submit their written comments before April the 30th, or they can also attend the public hearing during the City Council meeting on April 26th and provide verbal comments at the meeting as well. And so staff will then come back to you on May the 10th with a final version of the plan and a summary of any public comments that we do receive during that period, and ask for your adoption of the plan and for you to authorize us to submit it to HUD. That will then allow us to submit it before HUD's May 15th deadline. They do require 45 days to review the plan, and so that should ensure that the funding would be available to us after July 1st, assuming, fingers crossed, that it's approved. And so after that, then of course we would work on implementing this first annual action plan as council has directed. And I'm sure it'll just be a few short months. It'll fly by before we're back here talking about next year's plan that we would begin to develop as well. So
I just have
Any
one
other
more question. So when we decide to do these, do we inform the neighborhood ahead of time and explain to them what the procedure is?
They are part of the public input process, and then when we are starting construction on the project, we'll do some outreach through neighborhood services to let people know what's coming and that we're investing in their community.
And are we using LED lights, you know, isn't that the LED?
Oh,
LED,
yes.
thank you. I know it had an L and E and a D in it. Is there some way that we can do a little bit more education before we do that? And maybe a little bit more information from the yard area and their home area? And so we would prevent the light shining into their homes and the news, you know, we've had a lot of complaints lately. So, thank you. Oh, yes, you may, Laura.
Thank you.
In the draft summary of the 5-year consolidated plan, there was a comment that there would be a summary of comments or views not accepted and the reasons for them. So would we hear that on May 10th at the May 10th session? Okay,
Yeah.
just curious on all those processes. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your support.
Yes, thank you.
Since we're finished with the discussion, it's 5:40. I'm going to adjourn this for no further business, and we'll begin at the regular meeting at 6 o'clock. This meeting's adjourned.